Paradox is a gateway to spirit, absolute truth, God, infinite consciousness, love, which are the most important things that are missed by modern science, mathematics, and logic, rationality, materialism, atheism. All of these isms are missing the most important aspect of reality. They're missing the spirit and soul of the mind. They have despirited the mind, thereby crippling their own minds and the collective mind of our species. See, weak minds cannot handle paradox. Paradox is a clue that reality is groundless and infinite in its ultimate nature. But you have to be open enough and fearless enough to accept these clues. You have to be willing to connect the dots between all the different paradoxes and to see what is the common root that is sourcing all paradox, whether in logic, science, or elsewhere. And the deepest example of paradox is God itself. Because one definition for God, which is a very powerful definition, is that God is that which created itself. So one of the things that I know I struggled with as an atheist the most when it came to the God question is I had a very difficult time accepting the idea of God when I was younger, when I was a materialist and an atheist, because according to my logic, I was thinking like this. I was thinking that God is like some sort of supreme being, but then if you posit God to explain where the universe came from, then you need some other thing beyond God that will explain where God came from. Because otherwise, what does God really explain? So to me, it felt like positing God was a cop-out. And it didn't really resolve any deep existential issues. It just pushed the problem back one level. Well, what I later came to realize, of course, is that God is not like other objects in the universe. Other objects in the universe do not create themselves. All objects in the universe are sourced by some other object. Have you noticed this? Like your body did not create itself. It came out of your mother's body. And your car didn't create itself. It came out of a factory. And that factory didn't create itself. It came out of some other factory. And the first factory came out of, furnaces and forges that were not yet factories. And so on for everything in the universe. The earth came out of the sun, or the early gas clouds that were orbiting the sun. And then the sun came out of some other place like the Big Bang, you might say, whatever. You're always going to find this sort of chain, this nested chain. But then, see, if you assume God is just like one more object like that, then you say, well, then God must have some other source too, right? No, you don't understand that God is absolute. God is not a part of the universe. God is the entire universe. So when we're speaking about God, we're speaking about the totality of everything. And so when we're speaking about the totality of everything, what you have to realize is that thing created itself. It has the power to create itself, which is the ultimate paradox, the ultimate strange loop. How can something create itself? You might think this is impossible. It's a logical impossibility. But what you don't understand yet, what you're not conscious of yet, is that for God, because it imagines what is possible and what is impossible, nothing is impossible. Therefore, God is so unlimited, it is able to literally create of itself. How is that possible? See, if you tell a scientist that the universe created itself, this is not going to compute in the normal scientist's mind, in the materialist's mind, because it's not logical. How can something create itself? But then again, how can something exist unless it created itself? Where else could the universe come from other than from itself? And you can only understand this if you understand and appreciate paradox and strange loops. Infinity, of course, itself is a very paradoxical notion. There are many paradoxes that stem from infinity. And see, scientists and materialists and rationalists make a mistake here because when they start thinking about infinity, they run into these paradoxes. Their logical mind does, at least. And then they take that as evidence of the fact that infinity must not be real. It can't be actual. It can't exist. It's like a unicorn. We can think about it, but it can't be real. But it is real. It's everything you see around you. So what are some of the paradoxes of infinity? Well, for example, if infinity is infinite, then it must also be finite. Because if infinity wasn't also finite, then it actually wouldn't be infinite. Because to be truly infinite, you must include the finite in the infinite. Otherwise, you're missing the finite. You see, infinite means you're not missing anything. It's all-encompassing. It's total. A further paradox of infinity is that if reality or infinity is absolute unity, then it must also be divided. But Leo, I thought unity was the opposite of division. How could absolute unity also be infinitely divided? But how could it not? You see? Because if your unity excluded division, then it wouldn't be unity, it would be division. Because you would be dividing unity from division. That's division. That's not unity. So unity, paradoxically, must include all possible divisions. So there are interesting paradoxes here, such as how could God have created itself? That seems logically impossible. How, for example, the question of can God destroy itself? That's an interesting paradox that applies to infinity. There are interesting paradoxes about stuff that's beyond absolute infinity. You can ask the question like, well, can there be something beyond absolute infinity? And you can think about that and play interesting games with yourself. And as soon as you imagine something beyond absolute infinity, you have to reincorporate it within absolute infinity, because absolute infinity is absolute. But then you can keep imagining stuff beyond, and then you have to keep reincorporating it. You're playing this infinite game. Or the question of, are other people real or imaginary? This is a question that many of you guys struggle with this solipsism question. And this is really just the reason that this question is so tricky and difficult. I'll talk about solipsism in the future in its own episode, but it's really so tricky and difficult because it's paradoxical. You're trying to understand and you're trying to put infinity into some sort of box like idealism or solipsism or some other ism, but it's none of those. It transcends all of that. It's more radical than all of that. But your mind, your finite mind, wants to lock it down. He's like, oh, Leo is talking about solipsism, and it like wants to lock it down. But I'm actually not talking about solipsism. I'm talking about God. I'm talking about infinity. That's more radical than solipsism. And you're not going to get a clear answer to this question of, are other people real or imaginary? Because you're making a distinction there between real and imaginary, and you're assuming that distinction. And so you're running into paradoxes when you're thinking about, do other people really exist? Paradoxes within paradoxes. You're not going to be able to solve those paradoxes at the level of mind that you're at. You can only resolve them by increasing your consciousness and then incorporating all of these dualities into a deep unity. And only then will the paradox truly resolve.